Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar event. My name is Joshua, and I'm going to be your presenter today. We're here to talk about the payroll setup. We're going to be together for the next 20 or 25 minutes or so. Couple things before we get started here. If you've never attended a webinar event before, you got the little red arrow on the sidebar of your webinar control panel that allows you to minimize that. This is particularly important if you have a single monitor. Just allows you to get the full visual presentation of the event today. If you've got a dual monitor set up, just drag that off to your second desktop just to get it out of the way. Yes, you are looking at a blank screen. If you have questions for me, please type those into the questions portion of the webinar control panel there. I'll try my best to keep an eye on that, but if not, I will have to hold off and get to the end of the questions at the very end of the webinar event today. This is a very, very detailed and complex topic. Not complex per se, but long for sure. Which brings me to my final point about that, which is that we might be going a few minutes long here today, longer than the 20 minutes originally scheduled. We apologize, but we try to break down the events into the 20-minute segments, but sometimes they just don't fit. So if you have to duck out, we understand a recording or video of this event will be available on our website on the Support Center page by no later than 5 p.m. Eastern Time today. You can come in and watch the rest of that presentation then at your leisure. We just felt that this topic in particular kind of broke up, wasn't easy to break up for continuity's sake, and so we decided to kind of maybe extend it a little bit here with hopes that it would hopefully offer folks a little bit of a better through line with regards to their understanding of it. All right, so let's dive into our topic here. The first time you install Church Windows Payroll and you launch it for the first time, it pops up and asks you to enter your serial number. We've entered that. Once we click OK through that, the very first thing it does is open us to our system profile page. Okay, this is where basically information about payroll, about the church, about direct deposit, EIN number, tax ID, all that other stuff for the church is entered here. So the first thing we've got to do here under our organization info tab is enter our church name, and I'm just going to go ahead and type something in there. And you can certainly complete the, of course, organization address, city, state, zip code. We're not going to do that for time today. The email address, federal tax ID and state tax ID if applicable. But probably one of the most important things that you want to make sure is being selected here is your appropriate default withholding state. So we are, of course, in Ohio, and so we're going to make sure we choose Ohio on that. And then you simply click Apply to set those entries or that data. So just a couple of other things while we're here. System info is where you would set your pay labels. We default to regular overtime, additional vacation, and sick time. It's also where you establish the path for Church Windows from between payroll and accounting. Okay, and it controls and sets our payroll year as well. The EFT and ACH info tab is where we would enter the church's banking information as it pertains to direct deposit. So if your church decides to use direct deposit, this is the tab where you would enter the church's information. The overrides tab here is if, for one reason or another, the default setup that we have or established in the system is not accepted or needs to be changed based on restrictions or how different your bank is, we can change that as well. We would use this overrides to change that. Finally, the W-2 and W-3 e-info file. So if you file the information regarding the W-2s and W-3s electronically with the government, this is where you would enter that organization information that would then be transmitted electronically when you e-file. When we're done, we would simply click OK through the system profile screen. And before we go into the next portion of the topic, I want to point out that the P101 workbook, which is the one really I'm using for the basis of the webinar today, you can always find that online. But essentially, what I like to point out is that under Help and Contents, if we open up our help contents for payroll, the very first thing that it reveals for us is our easy steps to begin using payroll, which is essentially the same thing that I'm doing or using from our P101 book. So if you can get into the help files, literally I'm going down through each one of those in steps with the exception of the employee file number 6, which would be reserved for another webinar event. But this is literally, if you follow each one of these links and instructions in your payroll help file, it's going to walk you through basically everything that I'm going to walk you through today. Again, sans the setup of the employee file. Okay? The payroll help file is very thorough and very comprehensive. Okay? All right. So, as you know, again, that was kind of a quick tour through the system info or system profile screen. If you've got questions about it, please let us know. Part 2 of that would be then to go into our data setup here on the left and into our deductions file. So again, we go to data setup and deductions file, and this is where we would set up deductions. Now, we're not talking about tax withholdings here. We're talking about deductions, which are generally in most cases voluntary, pension contributions, health insurance payments, flex spending, health spending or health savings deductions, and in some cases not necessarily voluntary, wage garnishments or child support or what have you. Anything that is deducted from an employee's pay that would not be considered tax. And it would be as simple as clicking Add at the top here, and we'll call this pension. And then you would, of course, establish a frequency for it that it would be deducted. We'd also check here whether it would show separately on a box in a W-2, choosing the appropriate box number and the necessary code if applicable. Then, down at the bottom left, include in W-2 wages down here. Hopefully everybody should be able to see my highlighter. Include in W-2 wages is synonymous with the term taxable. So we would check the appropriate boxes for the respective taxing authorities where the deduction would be considered taxable or reportable. Okay? This include in W-2 wages, it works and functions exactly the same way for deductions as well as allowances, and we're going to come back to allowances in just a moment. So in this case, maybe a pension contribution would be considered non-taxable. We're not going to say it's going to show separately on the W-2, but it might. Again, I'm not a qualified tax professional, so I can't answer this. None of our technicians are. It's an important distinction. So just to let you know, we'll need to find some of this information out. But if it did, I'd say, okay, box 12, and then choose the appropriate box code number or letter, and then simply click OK. Now, one of the things that we talk about here is, and allowances, again, are very similar, except allowances are monies that are added to an employee's pay as opposed to taken away or deducted, is notice there's nothing here with regards to the amount. A deduction or allowance, the conditions and settings of that allowance or deduction may be shared or may be the same for all of your employees. Hence why once we set up the allowance or the deduction, then we go in and add it to the employee's file, and that's where we specify the amount or the percent. Okay? So as we're constructing the deductions and the allowances, we're never going to be prompted to enter an amount of any kind. Once I've set up the deduction, I would simply click OK, and it now appears at the top in my deductions list right up here. Okay? And I would simply continue adding other deductions the exact same way. Okay? Once you've entered the deduction, and additional deductions can be set up at any time, I would simply click OK through this. Okay? Yeah, if more than one person gets the same deduction, you only need to set it up in the deductions file once, and then just specify, as you add it to each employee file there, then at the employee file specify the amount. If we go back to data setup now and allowances file, we notice that it opens up a very similar looking window to the one that we saw under our deductions file. Okay? Again, we would click Add. We're going to set up, say, a good example of an allowance for payroll, for Church Windows payroll, would be the housing allowance for the pastor. So we're going to choose housing. Yeah, we pay that to them every paycheck. Yes, it does show separately on the W-2 and in box 14. Again, I'm not a tax professional, but I'm pretty sure that again would be considered, as long as it's showing in box 14 separately, it would not be considered reportable or taxable for anything else. Once I've set up again the housing allowance, I would simply click OK. And again, I like to remind you again, No amounts are being prompted for here. Okay? Again, housing allowances. We can set up a housing allowance for any monies that would be considered payable to an employee that are above and beyond their regular gross pay. You can set up reimbursements as allowances. Virtually reimbursements for anything in addition to housing. For employees who work 2 different job descriptions at the church, we oftentimes will recommend setting up one job description as their regular base pay, and then so they're clear what they're getting paid for the second job, then set up an allowance for that. It's a very effective way to keep those separate while still recording one or having one W-2 for the same employee. Very useful. Once we click apply and OK through that, again, we've set up our allowances. Again, and additional allowances can be set up throughout the year. Finally, under data setup here, well, not finally, we have the departments file. This is not, I don't see this commonly used terribly often. Basically, it allows you to categorize employees into various departments if you've got a large payroll. So you could create, if you've got half a dozen ministers and you've got, 20 lay staff, and 4 custodians, and, if you're a very large church and you need to categorize those based on perhaps different pay schedules, the departments file is effective for helping you to be able to keep those folks organized and choosing the appropriate or correct employees at the time you're paying them, simply by clicking add, entering the department number in the description. And then each employee can be assigned to a particular department. Again, nothing terribly difficult about it. But I see that used rarely, again, generally for larger churches. When we go back to data setup, we're going to go to our local tax wizard. Okay? Now, we like to explain that the local tax wizard in Church Windows is necessary because there are simply too many local taxing authorities nationwide for us to wait for all that information from all the possible local, areas and municipalities and what have you to be able to put that in there. But what we have determined from local taxes is when we go to that local tax wizard, we're going to create a new one, and we're going to call this, test, is that there's some commonality to them. They're either generally going to be a school district tax or a local flat rate tax, and that's literally what it boils down to. If you're unsure what your local tax is, you'll need to contact your local taxing authority to find that information. Then you would simply go in there, come in here like I'm doing here, and choose the local tax wizard, choose the year, set the local tax ID. It's generally systematically assigned, but it can be changed, with a description. And then from that point on, folks, it's literally follow the bouncing ball. So here it says, is this a school district tax? And you're given the option to choose yes or no. Okay? So then if I say yes and I go next, it says, please, enter the following information. What's the percentage rate? And asks us the question is the tax based on the local or state taxable income? If I go back and I say no, let me get rid of my drawing here. No, this is not a school district tax. And I go to next, it gives me a different set of questions. Is this local tax paid to a county, city, county, or other taxing authority? And I'm given the choice to choose. Then, is the local tax the same rate on all local wages? Basically, is it a flat rate tax? Yes or no. Again, depending on if I say yes, click next, it asks me for the percentage rate. If I click no, it then says which, if either of the following are allowed. Standard deduction or personal exemptions. So I think you get the idea here is we're going to say it's just a local flat rate tax, and we'll just say, it's, 0.75 or something, and then we're finished prompt with a finish prompt. Okay? And it says save changes to local tax file test 1, yes. Now, again, this local tax is available for me to, when I do decide to add, or when I am after I add my employees, for those that it is required to withhold that local tax, I can then assign it to them, and it will just systematically withhold that percentage rate from their regular gross wages automatically. Okay? The step that we're not going to be covering today in today's webinar is when we go to data setup and employee file. That is another topic that's reserved for a completely separate webinar event. It's complex enough that we can literally spend a whole entire 20-minute webinar event on just the employee file alone. So we're not going to be covering that. You, again, can find information in your help files under Contents, under option number 6 here, entering your employee information or clicking on the employee file, and that will open that up. Or please look for another webinar event in future that covers this topic. Okay? Finally, the account number setup, basically linking or setting up and connecting our payroll file, payroll module to our accounting system. Okay? So how we do that is we go back to our shortcut on our desktop for Church Windows and choose Properties. We want on our Property Shortcut tab, we note what it says in our field called Start In right here. So in this case it says C:\CW. Many of you may see that. Once we know what that is, we will simply bring up Payroll, go back to our System Administration and our System Profile screen. Here, check the Enable Transfer to Church Windows box again. Let me steer some focus right here. Okay, and then once we've checked that, we're saying we want to transfer and link Payroll to our accounting module. And then below that, we have to set the path, which is the same information as we saw in our Start In box of our Church Windows Properties screen. So I can either key that in, if I could type correctly today, or I can use the little browse or ellipsis button to the right there, and I can browse to the C drive into my CW folder and choose that there. What I always tell folks is you want to click Apply through this. Once it accepts your apply, then it's telling us that we have a valid link over to our accounting module and our chart of accounts. If we click Apply and it's incorrect, it'll pop up and say Incomplete data. The path to Church Windows is not found. Okay, so you have to revisit that. But we did get our apply accepted, so we're going to simply click OK through this. Now, even though we don't have employees set up yet in the system, I can go to places like System Administration, and my account number setup is here. Okay? So it is going to link over and find my accounts in accounting here, even though I don't have any employees. So, if I don't have anybody in here in the list. But it does find it, and it's telling me that I will do have them. So once I do have an employee added to the database, let's go ahead and just add one here real quick. Oops. Wrong names, wrong order. Right church, Josh, wrong pew. Complete the employee information. Click. It's telling us there that we have to go to the System Administration, account number setup, and link it. But now when we go to account number setup, our new employee should appear here, and I can choose the various accounts that accounting will be charged to, or where the payroll will be transferred to each and every time. We're kind of going back to the very beginning of our Payroll 101 book here, in the sense that it talks about our accounting to our payroll linking. So our expense account, payroll transactions are generally very complicated and complex. We might be debiting, we got our base salary expense account, here under our regular expense account, but then there's also an expense account that we'll have set up for the churches or employers' Social Security, Medicare match. In the cases of ministers, there's going to be maybe an expense account for their housing allowance that we're seeing separate on our chart of accounts. But then in addition to that, we've also got to have those liability accounts set up in our chart of accounts here in order to be able to transfer our tax amounts monies to for both the 941 and our local taxes. So we see here clearly 941 taxes payable, and then state taxes, and even perhaps one for county and local. Then we've got our local tax tabs and our deductions and our allowances. So, we've got to have all the chart of accounts set up with all of the necessary accounts, folks. that that support the need that we have in payroll. Not just the expense accounts for our employees and what we pay them for, but we've got to have all of those liability accounts set up to receive those amounts, those deductions and withholding amounts, whether they be taxes or under our deductions tab, for again, to receive monies for pension contributions or for health insurance contributions or child support or what have you, to be paid ultimately out later to another organization, as well as, again, expense accounts for the allowances that we're paying for additional monies that are paid to employees. And finally, our checking account or bank account from which those payroll checks are being written or paid out of, okay? But you've got to make sure that the payroll module is linked correctly over to our accounting module first before then we can come in here and do this. But you've also got to make sure that the chart of accounts is set up as well. So, all right. So that's our topic for the day, folks. We've gone about a minute or so long. I apologize for that. Let me see if there's any questions that we have coming in here. Well, I'm not seeing anything yet. If you have any questions, please go ahead and type those in for me. Again, we're going to be we'll host another webinar event that'll talk about the employee file setup here. I'm not sure exactly when that will be. But it will complete those steps of setting up payroll. But again, the employee files are terribly complex as well, and again warrants its own webinar event. So maybe some folks are typing in some questions there. I'll kind of sit quietly here to see if somebody's typing something in. Again, you can always review this webinar event on our website here later when the video is produced. Or maybe I'm just that thorough and folks don't have any questions. I wish. Okay, so I'm being asked, can payroll be used to set up and track tracking for 1099s? If so, how can this be done? That's a great question, Cindy. I didn't really have time to cover that. But yes, you would simply go into Data Setup and Independent Contractor file. Yeah, you would just set them up here as contractors. However, I do like to add a disclaimer to that is you can produce miscellaneous income 1099s from accounting directly, Cindy. You do not have to use the payroll module in order to produce 1099s for your contractors. You can set them up in accounting and produce 1099s for them from there. But if you wish, certainly, and you own Church Windows Payroll, you can come in here, set them up as independent contractors, and pay those contractors from payroll if you wish. Oh, well, thank you, Carrie. That's very nice. I appreciate the comments. Thank you. I hope that helps answer that, Cindy. But yes, you would go into the independent contractor file, add them here, using the add button in the upper right corner with their pay label and pay rate. Similarly, you would go into system administration, account number setup, choose the independent contractor file at the top, and again link them over to accounting, and then pay them as you would normally. Or I guess pay them as you would any other employee. Yeah, of course the difference, folks, between contractors and employees is, of course, they're going to receive a 1099 at year's end instead of W-2. They also don't generally have any taxes withheld or no Social Security amounts that are matched or what have you. So yeah, you can pay contractors from either payroll or accounting. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in here. If you do have other questions, please don't hesitate to call us at our support line, 800-533-5227, or send us emails at support@churchwindows. But we certainly hope we'll see folks here at another Church Windows webinar event in future. But this will be our last one for the week, and we hope to see you next week. All right. Have a good weekend, all. Take care. Bye-bye.